All right, welcome back to the New York City Multifamily Podcast. As always, I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Seth Glasser.
Yeah.
And we're really excited today because we have Ari Harkov with us. He is one of New York City's top elite residential brokers, the number one, I believe, team at Brown Harris Stevens nationwide, which is something to say. I hope we have that honor one day at Marcus and Millichap's award ceremonies. These guys from Cincinnati and the suburban markets have been killing us the last couple of years, but New York is coming back.
I rather play in the majors.
There you go. There's the slight. So we're here with Ari. He has been widely recognized by a lot of in the industry in general, and a lot of our mutual clients for having a very vast and insightful command of the residential market. So we're happy to have him here and just kind of dive into the weeds of the current market. We're filming today in October 9th or 10th or whatever it is. So
I think it's the 12th now, yeah.
Q4 is ready to go. So tell me, Ari, just general high level, are we in a buyer's market or a seller's market for the typical residential condo? And then I also want the same question answered for Brownstone, Brooklyn, or the Brownstone market. What are you just high level seeing?
Sure. I mean, so you sort of touched on it. I mean, New York City is a market, but it's made up of a lot of submarkets. So, if we're to talk about Manhattan condos, uptown, downtown, Brooklyn brownstones, you get a little bit more, nuance to the answer. But I would say overall, kind of big picture, 40,000 foot level, we are by and large in a light buyer's market, not leaning heavily towards buyers, but definitely kind of out of the seller's pendulum right now, with some limited exceptions in the market. And I would say, and we could talk about this today, even in the last couple of weeks, there's been some perceptible shift in the market.
Gotcha. And is that just a function of the interest rates higher for longer, everyone kind of maybe buckling in for,
Correct.
We're going to be in this extended time period? One of the things you brought up on our last time I spoke to you, which is probably a month ago, is that at the same time, interest rates are higher, there might be less buyers in the marketplace, but there's still less homes for sale. Correct. So is there a little bit of a counterintuitive, kind of strategy to actually putting, your home or condo or brownstone on the market right now because there's not that many, on-market comps as compared to normal? Or is that, what's the perspective on that? So like if I'm a seller and I've been thinking about selling for the last 2 years, did I miss my window or is it still a good, okay time?
I mean, there are a lot of ways to answer that question. The first thing is most sellers are buyers and most buyers are sellers in our marketplace. A little bit different than you guys, but in our market, people need shelter, right? Housing is shelter. So they've got to live somewhere. You get first-time home buyers. They obviously don't own something. There's nothing to sell. You get investors. You get second home purchasers. But the bulk of buyers are sellers and the bulk of sellers are buyers. So when you think about, is it a good time to sell, you're participating in the same market if you're then going to go out and buy another place or vice versa.
Right.
Theoretically, maybe you're moving to the suburbs and maybe the suburbs are moving a little bit differently than Manhattan or vice versa. But, generally speaking, you're a participant in the same kind of market movement. So that's always the first thing we talk about. And then, the counterintuitive piece to interest rates is in the short term, as rates move up, you see inventory increase because home affordability goes down and less buyers want to buy. But medium to long term, what you see is actually as rates go down, that's what drives inventory because then sellers have an opportunity to then buy and they're more enticed to list their home and the new inventory comes onto the market. And so what you're seeing on a national level, and it's playing out in New York City as well, is the fact that because interest rates are high and they're perceived to potentially stay high for long, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but it's the perception, people are not listing their homes for sale. And they're not listing homes for sale because not only are interest rates high, but the movement has been very significant in a very short period of time. So, I'm, Mr. Seller, I'm sitting on a 2 or 3% mortgage. Do I want to sell and buy at a 6 or a 7 or an 8% mortgage? I'm hesitant to participate in that market. And so I don't list my home for sale. I'm not out there as a buyer. And so I'm removed from kind of both sides of the market.
Right. No, that makes complete sense.
This, so I've experienced maybe a little bit when I was buying a house in Jersey 2 years ago. And, even more recently now, talking to some family and friends that are looking to do the same thing and buy a house in the suburbs.
Sure.
It's still really difficult. There's not a lot of inventory. The prices haven't really come down for the better product in within 25 miles of New York City. So the prices are the same. The interest rates are double. And there's still 10 people at these open houses. And I'm kind of curious, is that sounds like a little bit different maybe than what's happening in New York.
Yeah, I mean, so it's really interesting. I mean, if you look back at the past couple of decades and you look at the New York metro area, Manhattan and prime Brooklyn essentially led the pack, and the suburbs lagged. I mean, there were areas in Connecticut where you could not sell a home. It would sit on the home market for 2 years in 2018, 2019. In the last 3.5 years since COVID and since the lockdown, the inverse has occurred, and the metro areas are kind of leading the pack, and Manhattan and Brooklyn has been sort of lagging to a certain extent. And there are all sorts of reasons, obviously, return to office, COVID, lockdowns, all the different things that we think about. But the reality is, if you look at the suburban markets, the supply-demand equation is such that demand far outstrips the supply.
Right.
And that hasn't really changed. And because the lack of supply, because the supply has been so constrained and the buyer demand has been high, labor market is strong, equities markets are generally pretty strong.
Right.
All the other things we can talk about on a macro level, prices haven't come down.
Do you notice a difference in listings that are, let's say, at the primo end versus maybe the more attainable end? How does the buyer demand differ for, let's say, like a townhouse in Brownstone, Brooklyn?
What's the easiest?
What is that?
to sell?
$5 million?
What
I don't know.
Price
Like,
point
what
is the easiest to sell right now?
Yeah,
I feel
where
like
are you getting the most action? What?
I mean, it's interesting. So because so much of what's happening right now is rate driven, the lower end of the market in many respects is actually more challenging because those buyers are much more rate sensitive, and those buyers are, for the most part, all taking on financing. As you get to kind of the middle tier of the market, and obviously we can define that in different ways.
What is that,
1
5 to 10? Okay.
Yeah, 1 to 3, 2 to 5, 4 to 6. In that zone, you start to get buyers who are more financially, the depth of their financial wherewithal is more significant.
The banks want to lend to them still.
Banks will lend to them. They have more liquidity. Maybe there's some kind of trust or family money behind them, and their ability to purchase is more significant. And then as you get to the upper tier of the market, in Brooklyn that's probably 6 to 10, in Manhattan that's probably 10 and up. Then you're dealing with people who for interest rates don't matter. That's not part of the equation.
They can close cash.
They're buying what they want to buy at that point.
Right.
But we haven't seen to your point, like I still track certain markets where I own in, and you haven't seen like the capitulated like price points. Like I think there's been one in Montauk, which is a market that I track quite a bit. One property since I bought that I would have bought today. Only one where I thought that the pricing, and I wouldn't buy the same houses that I bought unless the prices came down 30% because I had a mathematical formula that I was working with. I didn't really,
This is debt. This is around.
Yeah, like the same house would have to go down by 30% for my rent versus mortgage payment calculation to be the same. Correct. And I'm mathematically disciplined, and maybe they pulled back 5 to 10%, but you haven't seen that capitulation. Maybe that's the problem with the residential market. Stop doing 30-year mortgages. Let's get the debt balloons every 5 years like commercial has, and we'll have more friction.
I mean, you joke, but by the way, if you look at most Western democracies outside of the U.S., that's the reality. You look at Canada, you look at Britain, you look at Australia, you look at most of Europe, you look at Israel, other countries. They don't have 30-year debt. There's no 30-year fixed debt.
Right. They have to reset it.
The market responds very quickly.
Right.
Yeah. Well, just going there, those countries, all that maturing debt is going to look a lot like our commercial real estate sector that we're having right now, because they all have expiring debt at 3 or 4%, and these people might not necessarily be able to afford or choose to afford
until
6%.
They invent the next financial product called a 50-year amortization. And anybody that owns real estate will actually benefit from that. Like it seems like that also could be just as plausible of a scenario. And the lower the cost that way, assets will inflate because you have a longer amortization schedule, and so be it. So speaking of like the most in demand, do you see more in demand from the end users that want to do their own work, or more demand for the turnkey product? Or is
turnkey, for sure.
Turnkey? No one wants to deal with the contractors and the permits and yada.
So during the depths of COVID, it was like no one wanted to touch anything that needed to be renovated because, the process was scary, the costs were scary, the supply chain issues, anything you can imagine was, terrible. It's gotten better. Labor has come down somewhat. Costs have come down somewhat. Supply chain, dysfunction has eased. But relative to where it was, let's say in 2019, the costs, and we were talking about it before the show, I mean, are 1.5x, 2x. I mean, it's a significant
especially
change.
For the retail buyer.
Exactly.
It's not like you're not Toll Brothers, right? You don't have like any leverage on any of the people that you're employing to work and clout. Purchasing power. It is what it is. Yeah, that's the price. You want it. All right, maybe. Yes. That's it. Like you have no leverage whatsoever.
Yep.
And I'm experiencing this myself. We talked about this a few minutes ago, but offline. But yeah, I don't blame people for paying more for a better product. And we see the same thing on the buildings that we sell.
100%.
Like some of these buildings that just require a lot of work, it's almost like it doesn't matter how cheap it is. It looks really cheap, but God, like what it takes to get there, like money, time, effort, brain damage, you just don't even want to deal with it. You rather pay more for it and just move in.
Right, like
100%.
just to that point, I was referencing. There's a really good article in Brick Underground that came out. It was published by a group. I think it's a design build firm called Mammoth Construction, and they basically broke down, and I don't think this would be self-aggrandizing because they're trying to win business, the real cost of what it takes to renovate a brownstone, in New York City. And the general take was, just for interior renovations, $300 to $500 a square foot. So for the average 3,200 square foot townhouse, you're looking at anywhere between $1 million to $1.5 million.
Yep.
To gut it with new MEP, mechanical, electric, plumbing, and the whole nine, could go anywhere from $600 to $800 a foot.
Yep.
So does that resonate with you?
It does, and those numbers used to be 300 to 500 was a gut.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, literally, that was the conversation.
Yeah.
And this whole time, you're servicing very expensive debt.
Correct.
You're servicing very expensive debt. You have a very angry spouse. You have kids who are living in a rental. You're miserable.
The
whole thing
angry
is
spouse
awful.
got me.
Yeah, yeah.
like you can relate.
I have been through it, and it's
Maybe
awful.
we should start.
There's
like
Sean, there's no price for this.
There's literally no price.
There's no
Like,
price.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not your life is your.
If you
There's no
come
price.
out the other side of that married, you're successful. Like, that's my thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
And so then it's just the question of who's the smarter guy in the room. Is the guy that's buying the shell for, in my areas at least, it seems like, we consistently $700 to $800 a square foot for a vacant shell of a townhouse. We just sold a couple of additional ones. If they're going to put 600 to 800 in, there might be a little bit of spread even if they hit 2,000, but it also kind of, I think people always miss the in-between when they look at a comp. And maybe the smartest money in the room is the retail consumer, because the replacement cost is $1,800 a foot.
And it's going up. I also think you have to look at it from a much longer time horizon than our attention spans sort of naturally bear us to. And that's what I've noticed in my own personal life dealing with some of these things. And I think it kind of depends on how long, why are you buying this? What's the purpose? How long do you plan on owning it? And I think that kind of factors into maybe what road you take, your cost of capital, your cost of brain damage and time in your personal life and your relationships, and what it's going to take to get the project to where you want it to be, and how much of a perfectionist you are, right? Like you might want to build this dream house for yourself, right? And it doesn't matter what it costs. It doesn't matter if it takes 2 years, not 6 months or whatever, right? I mean, I'm sure you come across these people who are like, I don't care. I'm building this the way I want to build it.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And then but talk to them when it's done, and then ask them how it went.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do they typically say? How does it
I
go?
would tell you, if I polled 100 clients I've had over the years who have renovated, the vast majority of them had anything from a really bad to a miserable experience, and a small percentage of them were like, maybe I'd consider doing it again, but I'd probably prefer not to.
Interesting.
You almost never get the it was smooth, it was easy, things were on time, it was on budget, we didn't have any issues, it was great, I'm thrilled with it. I almost never have that conversation.
Yeah. Right, because it's so hard. I mean, I've been dealing with contractors, and it's just, you can't get them to do a fixed price. And then, if it's cost plus,
how much
it's
is
kind of
cost?
an unknown.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll let you know when we're done. Yeah.
I get it.
The big thing in New York City, I mean, to interrupt you, but the big thing in New York City that people don't factor in is the time.
Right.
These renovations, forget about your 600 to 800.
Right.
That renovation takes really a year and a half to 2 years between permitting, planning, physical work, soft cost, punch list, the whole thing. Your kid went from age 4 to 6. They're life
and
changes
your
that
personal
happen.
time that you're spending on decision making, whereas you're not spending on your active income business.
Yeah.
Correct. And also so you guys obviously are commercial facing, so you're dealing with people who are real estate professionals. I'm dealing with people who are not real estate professionals.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with an executive at Google who is very sophisticated and much smarter than I am, but real estate is not his or her bread and butter. He doesn't want to be meeting with the project manager and picking out tile and dealing with the masonry wall has this, issue and we got to do that. That's not his bread and butter. you know?
Right.
So
You get a lot of emotions involved in your business?
oh, just a little bit. Just
A little bit,
Yeah.
I don't know how you handle that. I mean, we're emotional, but like at least it's like discipline. They're not like going to the building every day.
Oh, no. Our business is a different animal. So yeah, for a lot of people, they just say honest. I mean, I had a very smart private equity client years ago who I was actually a friend of mine from business school, and she said, I'm overpaying by a couple $100,000 for this house, and I'm totally happy to do it because it's turnkey. I move in day one, I have to deal with it.
Right.
I don't want the brain damage.
Right. And especially when the rates were low and you're locking in 10-year IO, it was like, I did I bought a couple like fixer uppers, but looking back, I would have just gone even up my budget, but borrowed 80%. Like I got a partner in the bank at 3%. Yes. Like
it was free.
It was literally free money. Yeah, it was literally free
really,
money.
really cheap.
Yeah.
It was really cheap.
So if you were going to make a $5 million investment into any neighborhood of New York City into a condo or townhouse, like what locations do you think are just going to keep shooting up?
I would say the poster child of the New York City real estate market has hands down been the renovated Northwest Brownstone Brooklyn market.
Okay,
hands down.
So we're talking about Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, Brooklyn Heights.
Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, to a certain extent Williamsburg, good blocks, what have you. But you're talking about, if you think about from a carry cost perspective, these townhouses, are
low
taxes, no common charges. Any sort of capital improvements I make, I can factor those into my basis. A lot of square footage, basement, outdoor space, what have you. It's sort of like the perfect blend of suburban city that people can find. And then you factor in kind of the demographic shifts in New York City where people are wanting to raise their kids in the city a little bit longer. Incomes have gone up. Maybe they're not quite ready to go to the suburbs yet. So there's demand for it. And then you factor in the supply side, which is the supply is 100% constrained.
Yeah,
you can't build a tower of townhouses.
It's all R6B contextual districts. Good luck.
It is.
And these are just beautiful 100-year-old townhouses.
And no one can build more of them, right?
Right. So you're buying something with an artificial supply. The taxes, you sell it for like $5 million. The taxes on these things are like 10 grand.
10 grand a year.
Right.
So
which is unbelievable.
It's ridiculous.
This is like a huge topic of conversation around the city budget, right? Like how do you, it's just not
that's the only warning sign. But is 2,000 a foot, like can you get anything that's gut renovated for under 2,000 a foot in Brooklyn Heights, Cobble Hill?
Brooklyn Heights, Cobble Hill is a little dicey. As you start to get into like deeper Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Borum Hill, Park Slope, high teens.
Yeah, high teens.
15, 16, 17, 18, you can start to see product. Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like you could probably sell Shaun something here right now.
Absolutely.
We turn the mic on. He's looking.
I just got my IRS bill.
He's asking the right questions.
If you're a seller out there, just know I am hungry as a mofo right now. I gotta roll.
You're asking good questions.
Yeah, I gotta get some stuff going. What do you see happening with rents? Are there certain areas that are still going up, or there's certain areas that are flat? Like what's still on the up? What's kind of fading down?
Yeah.
Current economy.
So, I mean, if you look back 2 years, rents went absolutely bananas during COVID. I mean, the increases like blew every landlord's wildest imagination, 20, 30, 40% year over year. I mean, massive numbers. And then at a certain point in the last kind of 6 to 9 months, you felt tenants starting to pull back a little bit. Like enough is enough. I've reached my threshold. You're going to ask a question.
I was, but
okay. So, and then this summer, part of what happened was the landlords and tenants kind of missed each other. So the landlords continued to seek big increases, and the tenants maybe pulled back a little bit. And so the absorption rate this summer and the overall activity and kind of dynamism of the rental market in Manhattan and Brooklyn softened a little bit because they kind of missed each other a little bit.
Would you say that's a 5 to 10% softening or more?
I would say it's probably less about prices coming down and more about prices not continuing to go up.
Right.
And so the landlord wanted it to continue to do this, and the tenant was just willing to stay here.
Right.
Yeah. Did you notice, like, where did those people go, or what did they do generally? Was there a change in the demographics? Because if your rent went up, like you said, 30%, and then the landlord tried to raise it another 10, 20, 30%, did they leave? Did they put their foot in the ground and try to renegotiate with a landlord at the same rent? Or did they go to like maybe a secondary neighborhood or a building without an elevator? Like kind of what was the,
what's the calculus?
I know this is like, but like broad
I feel
strokes,
like most
what
owners
happened?
try to keep the tenant in there.
I would.
I think a lot of that is what happened. Like, so I'm landlord Joe. I go to you, tenant, and I say, hey, I want a 15% increase. You say you're out of your mind. I'm not doing that. I say, okay, what about 10? We settle at 7 or whatever it is. But I try to keep you when I realize you're not going to pay the 15, and you try to stay when you realize the cost of moving and broker's fees and headache and brain damage and the rest of it. So a lot of it became stickiness, and people just stayed. One of the interesting things about the rental market, and one of the things that's propping up the rental market is the fact that because rates are so high and there's this kind of general sense that, the macroeconomy at some point has got to go into a recession, you're pulling would-be buyers into the rental market, and that's propping up values on the rental side.
Right. I mean, I was on the phone today with a couple, large owners, and they are noticing a pullback in rents more than just the general seasonal type of thing.
Yes, there's definitely a shift.
And going to the counterintuitive strategy of still putting your home up for sale right now because inventory is low. The general psychology in our investment sales market is this is not a good time to sell for obvious reasons of cap rates being elevated and high interest costs. But when you actually think about what you're missing, like where's your blind spot, it might be that rents are at their peak and might be coming down 10 to 15% year over year. And this is market by market, sub-market by sub-market. It involves a address by address, detailed discussion with your rental broker and your investment sales, consultant. But selling a 7 cap at elevated rents is the same thing when you really do the numbers as selling a 6.25 cap if rents go down 10%. Is the same thing a 7 cap at today's rents of selling a 5.5 cap if rents go down 20%. So you really have to put yourself into that, challenging perspective of, is this really a bad time to sell? Because I would sell at a 5.5 cap. And if your rents are going to go down 15%, you really are selling at a 5.5 cap. You just need to forecast into the future.
Right.
So, people aren't hiring. Every, September, usually New York City gets a wave of, new buyers that come to New York City, usually with their parents co-signing, whether they have a job or not. I don't think those parents are co-signing if they're not employed, and there's generally a hiring freeze. So I think there's a lot less of that share market coming. And now you have some people just really questioning whether they can, survive in New York City if they're not, getting the raises. So I think that we're no one wants to talk about this. No one wants to say rents are, softening, but I think that we're at the very precipice of a little bit of pullback, and it's going to be sharper in certain areas. And from a when is the right time to sell standpoint, selling at a 7 cap might not be the end of the world.
No. And to add to your point, the rental market is much more tied into macroeconomic movement, right? So labor market shifts, equity market shifts, people feel that immediately because they're making quick short-term decisions, and it's very budget constrained. If I own a home and the stock market goes down 20% or what have you, there's much more stickiness. I'm not immediately turning around and selling that home. I'm not a forced seller. The sales market is sort of like a super tanker. It doesn't respond as quickly. The rental market will respond like that. Immediately you'll feel it in the rents.
Right.
How does the declining rental market impact development? Like, are you tracking new development? And if you're a developer and you're looking at the declining rental market, does that impact maybe the decisions you make today about, should I buy this development site? Right? And where are you kind of seeing?
The development market as a whole, it's a huge issue. So with the 421A going away, almost no rental development pencils to begin with.
Right.
If I then layer in a potential rent decline, basically no rental pencils, and the condos don't really pencil either because the hard costs, the soft costs are what they are. The land costs really haven't moved that much in an appreciable way. And the top line revenue is kind of wavering, maybe coming down a little bit. So, that gets to a kind of housing shortage and housing supply conversations that's very pertinent to New York City, both on an affordable and free market level and nationwide. We have a housing shortage in this city and we have a housing shortage in this country. And from a policy perspective, wherever you land politically, if we don't do things to change that, you're going to continue to have this market where the haves have more and the have-nots have less because they can't get on the ladder.
Right.
Right. And so, why are rents so high? We can't build more rental housing stock.
So this is all zoning related.
Seth, I think for the most part, again, it's got to be in the B plus, A minus markets, but we're still seeing developers buy the land and they're not worried about the short term. They're like, I'm not going to be coming out of the ground and finish for 2 to 3 years. And if there's no 420, there's already going to be
a bet. Basically.
Yeah, they're making a bet. They're always forward thinking. They're like, look, we'll probably be out of this current high interest rate turmoil by then. There's not going to be any competing product. 2 to 3 years is way out. And I still have guys cutting checks even where deals really don't pencil without a 421A, just because they know that a common sense is probably coming.
Are they buying sites today to start the work ASAP, or are they buying it and kind of maybe waiting?
Are they land banking?
They're kind of waiting. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of groups that are just. It's almost like, when are you going to start building, dude?
Yeah.
They're they're going on acquisition mode, and then they're going to stop buying, and then they're going to go on actually building mode. But they'll kind of they come out of the ground every now and then, and they're just buy 10 sites in a row. So we're on a tear with a couple different groups in particular.
Yeah, interesting.
That did not buy anything.
Do you remember, like, maybe it was 10 years ago in Long Island City, there was this huge wave of development.
Yeah, everyone said they're going to be ghost towers. Look what happened. They all filled up.
They all filled up. The rents went up, like, because they were new and nice, right?
Sure.
And then the rents kind of, did they come crashing down? I don't remember.
No,
that
they
well,
never
but
crashed
they
down.
didn't
This
come down?
idea that like any apartment building would ever sit vacant, other than the ones our legislature makes sit vacant because of the stupid rent laws. But that's a myth. If the rents go down enough, you'll see other people that never had the chance to live in New York City now come to New York City, which is what
happened
usually
during
happens.
COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was COVID.
It's a whole new wave of people are like, let's get some fun. I want to be close to the theater district. Like if you're telling me a Midtown West, 2-bedroom I can get for $3,000 a month, like I'm in.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of where they lease up, but I don't think anything's ever going to sit vacant.
Yep. Yeah, no, for sure. Vacancy levels will always be low, for sure.
And I know you rub shoulders with some of the institutional groups, and you do a lot of advisory work for them that are playing in this free market, protected tax class space. What are they seeing? Is it mostly just driven by the lack of supplies as a result of legislation that doesn't allow more apartments to be created that they're plugging into this market, or is it their intuitive knowledge that replacement cost is exactly what they're paying and they don't want to do the work? Like, where is that investment thesis coming from? What do they see that others don't see?
I think the thesis is, if you look at New York City and the legislature on a state level, the value of free market housing is only going to go up over time. Whatever you believe politically, wherever you think the city or the state may go, the perception is that the value of truly bulletproof free market housing will only increase over time, and there will be significant constraints around that supply.
Right, bulletproof being the operative word.
Yes, that's the operative word. And then when you take bulletproof free market housing and then you layer on protected tax class, you're now capping your tax increases. The two come together and create this incredible opportunity. And then when you remove all the variability, cost, brain damage, carry, et cetera, around renovating and value add, now you've got something that cash flows and almost functions like a coupon or financial instrument on a real estate level.
Right.
I think that's the thesis. And then, if you look at zoning issues, NIMBYism, whatever you want to call it, the inability to create more housing, it all kind of comes together in this thesis. And I think, a lot of these institutional groups believe that, this 5-10 year play of owning protected tax class, free market housing in New York City, you almost can't go wrong, essentially.
Right. Your starting yield is not going to go lower. It's kind of like the old days of rent stabilized housing where it's like, we'll buy a 4 cap, but like our rents are artificially low. There's only they can never
go down.
Right. It shouldn't go ever down ever, just in theory until they're
really certainly paying at top of market to check every box, right?
Mm-hmm.
To completely insulate themselves from every type of risk that can be thrown at them. What is this? Is there like are they planning on owning these for 5 years, 10 years, and then are they planning on bundling them to another institution in scale, or retailing them out, hiring you guys to sell every single one to
TBD? I'm guessing probably at scale.
Institution.
Yeah. Institutional, I think. If you look at the kind of institutionalization, for lack of a better word, of real estate and kind of residential real estate across the U.S., you look at the Wall Street, firms that are buying thousands of single-family
homes across the country.
The real estate market from a residential perspective, I think, is shifting from this kind of mom-and-pop individual model to maybe a more kind of institutional model. Whether you think it's good or bad, it is, and it's not changing. There's money to be made, right?
Yeah.
You layer in tax benefits, you layer in equity upside, you layer in cash flow, depreciate. You look at all the different kind of benefits, and all these institutional players are saying this is an asset class we want to play in.
No, it's 100%. We just saw a trade in Williamsburg on North 6th and Wythe. Empire State Realty Trust bought 4 apartments and 3 stores. Credit tenants for $26 million. I think it was $2,600 a foot, 5.25 cap. This is the group that owns the Empire State Building.
And they bought 4
apartments and 3 stores on North 6th and Wythe in a 1031 exchange. They sold some suburban multifamily or office. So there's a flight to quality. But I think this just goes into I touched on it last time we were speaking. It's just when you're in a 1031 exchange and you're not really sure about anything other than the gateway cities, you're not going to take chances in the Carolinas or whatever anymore. And then you funnel it down to New York City. And in exchange, when you don't have time to diligence everything, you really don't want to take any chances on anything that isn't bulletproof free market. And so you're seeing that's another category of seller that I'm like, hey, if you're looking for what can trade at a negative leverage cap rate, it's this type of product.
Yeah.
So if you have a combination of maybe having bulletproof free market and, high rents, this might be a time to like take advantage of that, because every 1031 buyer is only looking for that one thing right now.
Yeah, with yields going up on other assets and just the treasury, right? You can just sit on your couch and make almost 5.5%. You really got to look at what you own, what the true cash flow is on the value. And if you have, like you said, something completely bulletproof like that, you got to really consider very hard selling. I was talking this morning to a friend who is in the cell phone tower business. They sell, if you have a cell phone tower on the roof of one of your buildings, like Verizon, sure, AT&T, whoever, they typically pay like $2,000 a month or something like that. There are companies out there that will buy them for 20 times the rent roll, which is a 5 cap. So you can go get a 5 cap on a New York City piece of real estate. The building itself might be worth a 7 cap, right? When we talk about like selling these types of buildings, 6, 7 cap, but if you could sell an asset for a 5% return to somebody else, you kind of have to look pretty closely at doing that.
Yeah,
and I think
you can
that's
never
a real
sell a cap rate at negative leverage. You should take a look at it.
100%.
Well, I'm getting the bright lights sign. So we want to hit you with one final question. I'd love to have you back here every quarter, or something just to touch base. But we have one final question we haven't asked in a while. Seth, you want to give it a whirl?
If you could have dinner or lunch with anyone in the world, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh wow, put me on the spot there.
I'll give you a moment.
You got to give me a moment on that. That's a big one. Have dinner, dead or alive, with anyone in the world, who would it be? I was not. I thought it was going to be all real estate focused.
Yeah, no.
This is you guys threw me a curveball.
Clearly, someone doesn't listen to the podcast.
See, people listen, but only for the first 5 minutes.
Yeah,
right? They're like,
All right, I'm going to go out in left field. I'm going to say Robin Williams.
Oh, interesting.
Ooh, that's a new one. What?
I just think pick his brain and think about like how does his mind work, creative vision, like what he does, like the way the synapses fire in his brain. He's like.
Next level human. Next level intelligence.
Yeah, a level of intelligence is like just off any chart you could ever create.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Robin Williams movie or?
Honestly, I love his stand-up. I think it's the most incredible because he's just literally pulling. I don't know if I can say shit, but he's pulling shit out of his ass.
Yeah, he just literally.
His voiceovers are out of control.
Out of control.
Yeah.
Out of control. And interesting as a little tidbit, his son was a client of ours years ago, which is part of what made me think of him.
Oh, gotcha.
What did he buy?
He owned a place actually in Williamsburg.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, they left, but very cool guy, really awesome guy. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So,
cool.
Well, thanks for coming, Ari.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
it. If you're out there, you can find Ari. I'm sure his contact info is all over the internet. So give him a call. We're open for business. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you on the flip.
Thank you.
See you, Ari.
Thanks, guys.